Paul, it's great to see you again for our third segment of Sharpen the Saw.
Me too, Jim.
And it's great to be able to provide an ability to refresh for our people on campus and also for the folks off the campus. So thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
So Paul, in the habit 3, there's an analogy of a compass versus a clock.
Mm-hmm.
So using the compass as a tool, how do we put things in priority in our to-do list so that we're more mindful of that compass?
Okay, that's a solid question, Jim. I think there's an underlying principle that we have to start with, and that is we actually measure success by the compass, not the clock. But I'll tell you how we got off of that timeless principle in the what's called the industrial age, actually the manufacturing age. The time clock was introduced, and as we've developed a habit as society to look at the clock for the start of the workday, the start of the break, the end of the break, and the end of the workday, as if the clock became almost dominant in our psyche. But the truth of the matter is that the gold medal doesn't go to the person who gets in the earliest to work. It doesn't go to the person who stays the latest at work. The gold medal doesn't even go to the person who works the hardest. The gold medal goes to the person who contributed the most towards the mission objectives of the organization, the family, or society.
So that's effectiveness rather than efficiency is what you're saying in a short.
Yeah, and I'll also say that the bottom line question, this is where you ask me, what I always ask myself is, how can I contribute in whatever I'm doing to add the most value to others? If I do that, that's a compass-based question.
That's right.
And it kind of erodes that old, ineffective habit of thinking about the clock. It's about movement north on the mission.
Movement north on the compass. Thank you. Paul, in the video for Habit 3, there's an analogy of big rocks. And they're trying to put this in a container that represents our big tasks.
Sure.
So how do we, these smaller rocks that come into our day, how do they creep in? How do we handle those situations?
Wow. Okay, so I actually got to ask Dr. Stephen Covey that same question. So I'm going to go right to the wisdom of the guy. All right.
Great.
I asked him that question. He said, "Well, Paul, that's a good question." And this is one technique, because in the 7 Habits, it's all about behavior or behavioral techniques. Sorry. He said, this is Stephen Covey. I do not check emails for the first hour of every day. He said, what I do in that first hour is begin to work on at least one wildly important goal. He said, now in doing that, I immediately begin to carry my own weather. Yes, by putting my priorities first over somebody else's.
Rather than reacting to email the first thing you do when you walk in.
Yeah. So here's what I'm going to say. For me, generally speaking, I think emails are other people trying to force their priorities on us. So I think what we want to do, let's decide, as Stephen counseled me and therefore all of us, let's decide to work on our big rock priorities first, and then let the smaller rock priorities show up after that.
Sure.
That is the framework to get to the small rocks. We want to get to them. It's not like we're going to do them.
We don't ignore them.
But we're going to do the priorities first,
Great.
The wildly important goals first, and then the rest.
That's a great concept, given that a lot of what's driven in management is email driven.
Right.
That's a great idea. Thank you. One of the concepts in Habit 3 is managing your time.
Right.
Now, some professionals actually plan their calendars months or years in advance.
Yeah.
What would you recommend as a reasonable time horizon in the planning process?
Well, I'll share with you with what I do, Jim. I'm always booked out approximately 6 months in advance, and often a year in advance. Now, by the way, I'm talking about meetings, to-do lists. I really know kind of what I want to do that far in advance. And that kind of aligns with my ideas of what my priorities are, that level of planning. Now, what I will tell you is that as I'm focusing on how I can make the most positive difference to the greatest number of people, I know 6 months from now what I want to try to accomplish. However, I'm not crazy for the reason people think. I do remain flexible during the days, weeks, months, and year that are coming up. But I have a framework to try to get to the big rock priorities. But in flexibility, I will make adjustments to what shows up and deal with it and manage it as it shows up.
Excellent.
But I do have the framework.
So even for folks in an administrative position here on campus, about 6 months would be a starting point.
I think that's kind of a minimum, and it kind of cuts with a semester in a university.
It does. Yes.
But a year in advance is also quite workable.
Okay. Thank you. That's great.
You bet.
So, Paul, some of us that are older have traditional planning.
I say more mature, Jim.
More
We're
mature.
not
Okay.
old. We're mature. Keep
I've
going.
always used a hard copy written planner to
Okay.
plan my day and
Okay.
my weeks and months.
Yeah.
Have you shifted to an electronic type of methodology in recent times, or what are you doing now currently to help plan? What tools?
I have been accused, and I'd like to say I'm a half werewolf and half vampire. Now, so what that means is I'm transitioning and still using paper planning and a calendar, and also using electronic as well. So let me tell you what I like. So I love the printed copy, a single month with all meetings and all to-dos for the month of January, for example. But also that printed copy, I get to see more than I can on the smartphone version.
Okay.
It's harder to get that
Sure.
level. You see much less and less as you try to bring up a month. But also with the printed month, I get to lay out, as we were talking about earlier, I get to lay out months, maybe 3 to 6
Several
months together,
Uh-huh.
and see how they connect. That's an
Okay.
important perspective. However, if you ask me right now, what am I doing this afternoon? I'm pulling out my smartphone.
I see.
I get enough detail in the daily version that the paper is not needed and also not useful. So I am transitioning more and more to electronic,
Okay.
but right now I think both are useful.
Very good. So long-term planning would be paper-based for some people still.
Yes.
And then some of the younger folks taking this course probably have already transitioned to electronic.
They both have a
useful.
place. They
Very
both
good.
have a place.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today for Habit 3,
Oh,
and I
Jim.
really hope this is
Yeah.
going to be valuable to the folks listening in today. And
Thanks.